Hi everyone, welcome back. It's coffee time. So today we're having iced coffee. Tastes great. Today we're going to be talking about what would I do differently if I ever get a chance to travel back in time to restart my undergraduate program. Now that's an interesting topic, right? So in other words, this episode is tailored to the audience that are starting their undergraduate program here in the United States. Now, of course, you might ask that, hey, since you did undergrad in University of Rochester, then how is that going to be generalized to other places? That's a good question. I went to University of Rochester for my undergraduate program. So in this episode, let's try to strip off that factor outside of the equation. And we're just going to be talking about things that I would have done differently if I were just an undergraduate student here. So with that being said, let's get started. Number one, and this is probably going to be the most important thing and the most immediate thing that I will try to take care of if I can ever start my undergraduate again, which is to move everything online. Now, there's going to be a personal preference, right? Sometimes you read something and the feeling of touching the hard copy is just going to be very magical. Then you're entitled to feel that way, right? There's no right or wrong. It is true, sometimes hard copies, pen and pencil, will help you learn things a little bit more interactively. But that should not be stopping you from getting familiar with the online platform, right? It's not either or. If you want to read the book, you feel free to read the book, but that should not be stopping you from not knowing how to send an email, right? So that's gonna be problem number one. When I was back in China and I was in high school, I never get a chance to even use email. I had to learn that when I came here. Now, of course, right now it's a different age, right? Back then, we're talking about 10 years ago. Right now, I think everything is online. You should know how to use email, you should know how to use Zoom, and more importantly, on top of that, you should know how to use Overleaf, which allows you to add a PDF in LaTeX. And specifically, you feel free to draw any kind of graphs, any mathematical formula on PDF. And I wasn't able to do this back then, but right now, the speed of typing LaTeX for myself is fast enough to catch up if somebody is talking live out there on the stage in front of a lecture. So something like that is definitely going to be important, right? 4 years of undergrad, you're going to be taking a lot of notes, especially if you're a computer science major or mathematics major or a statistics major, you're going to be taking a lot of notes. Each lecture, you will probably take 10-20 pages note. So you can do the math, how many pages you're going to produce in 4 years. And you can also do the math, how many trees you're going to kill in 4 years. So with all that being said, if I could ever go back in time and restart my undergraduate program, I will take all of the notes using LaTeX, which means I'm moving everything from hard copy to digital. Point number two has something to do with research experience. Now, a lot of people think, oh yeah, research experience just for PhD students or for the people who want to go to doctoral program. That's not necessarily true. Research experience is more about discussing something quantitatively with data, with results, with somebody else. It could be with a professor, it could also just be with your classmates. Now, of course, when you're in undergraduate program, you're overwhelmed with a lot of other information that it's unnecessary for you to talk to your friends with pen and pencil and a table for results, right? That's not very likely. What's more likely is you do this seriously and you actually go into a lab, you get some experiments done, you take the results, you summarize it, and then you go talk to a professor or PhD students. And I think that back and forth critical thinking or a critical discussion is going to be very important. And I definitely feel like I missed out on a whole lot of that when I was doing undergraduate school. Most likely in terms of my experience, undergraduate school is just about going to lecture, do the homework, and submit it. Maybe you learn a little bit something. That's of course true, right? The capability of solving a homework problem, it's still a skill set. It doesn't represent 100% of how you will perform when you're out there in the society, but it's an important skill set. So if you guys can get a chance to go above that by injecting this interactive research experience with your collaborator, your classmates, PhD students, professors, or other faculties, then of course this is going to be much more helpful for you to think independently and think critically. Now, one important thing I want to mention is this is not a substitute for your class performance. They are not either or relationship. It's not like you do this and you cannot have that. So in my experience, I actually found that the research experience I had later on in my undergraduate school actually come back to reinforce what I had learned in the class material. I'll give you an example. The research I did at undergrad was something very simple. I run a linear regression on stock data, and I'm simply looking at if the model is a good fit or not. I actually learned a whole lot of the theory of that model in econometrics. And econometrics is going to be an important class if you're going to be majoring financial economics or simply just economics. A lot of other social science, they also require econometrics as well. So I feel like if I could go back in time, I would probably do the research aside, same time as the econometrics. And when I say research, I'm not talking about the final project of econometrics class, because that project needs to be tailored for grading purpose. And when you factor into grading purpose, your mind is incentivized to think about the project differently. And that missed guidance, it's not going to be what's helping you to move forward in your research experience. So in the end of my undergraduate year, and I wish I could have done that earlier, was to do this independent project, and I can do this with a professor. So it's simply a linear model, and in fact it's a multivariate linear model that pretty much I learned all of that from econometrics, and I realized that a lot of things from econometrics that we learn to solve on paper is quite different than what we can actually do in the field. On paper, you look at the classic ordinary least square model, and then you're trying to check the assumptions, linearity, collinearity, autocorrelation, homoscedasticity, right? All these assumptions you can check. You can derive the expectation. You can derive the conditional expectation. You can also derive the variance of your covariate. You can derive the covariance of a matrix if you're in a multivariate world. So all of these things, it looks fancy, you can derive on paper, it gets you the point, it gets you an A, right? But none of that helps in reality. And in reality, when you're handling real data, it's a completely different world. So if I could have that as a side experience, which I can come back to reinforce what I learned in class, I would definitely want to do that much earlier, even just in the freshman year. The third point I want to make is about networking. When I was an undergraduate student, I was an international student, and I had to go out of my way to network. And I feel like I'm not getting a whole lot of help. I feel like I'm hitting a lot of barriers. Now, of course, that's partially due to lack of experience for myself, and that may or may not be the case for you guys. Maybe you guys have enough experience, and you can just land that internship automatically. So, if I could go back in time, I felt like I would probably lower my expectation a little bit. Instead of trying to shape myself into a certain field that I may not have the expertise of, I'll probably just try to be a generalist, try to be a little bit flexible on the job searching process, so that I could potentially apply more internship in not just one field, but also many fields. One mistake that I made in terms of networking in undergraduate school was I only network for finance people. And I realize right now that's a mistake. It's a mistake because when you're in the beginning of your career, when you're in the beginning of the learning curve, you're not trying to limit yourself. You're trying to expand your horizon, and you're really trying to talk to as many people as you possibly can. Especially, I'm in undergraduate school, right? I'm looking for an internship or part-time. It's not supposed to be a full-time, it's not supposed to be a profession that I can launch for the next 10, 20 years. So the perspective is obviously very different. You should be coming in with the expectation that you're there to serve somebody coffee. You should feel lucky to just be there. And that really should be the attitude that you bring on the table. Versus when I was in undergrad, I didn't really have a whole lot of that. For some reason, I had this huge ego that I want to go into financial industry and I want to make a lot of money, which later on I actually did. But in the beginning of the learning curve, it's actually very difficult to go out there with this kind of attitude. So in other words, this third point is really about changing your attitude when it comes to networking or landing a job or searching for your career. You really want to be flexible about it. But on the other hand, you cannot be too broad when you're going out there to talk to the recruiters. That's going to be taking things to the other extreme, right? The recruiters are there, they have their day job, right? They have their agenda they need to fulfill. They're not there to help you, right? So coming from a non-target school with not that competitive GPA, I really should be doing some of the job for these recruiters. Meaning that when I talk to them, I really should give them a specific detailed plan and detailed job description of what kind of role do I actually want. And yes, I understand that this is going to be very difficult if you're just brand new starter, but that's going to be the hard work, that's going to be the effort that you have to put down to be able to move up and beyond. Unfortunately, I didn't realize that in the beginning of my undergraduate program. I only realized that when it's the last year, which it's not that late, but I feel like I could have gotten more opportunities if I started to change that part in the beginning of the undergraduate year. The last point I want to make, and we're going to wrap things up from here, is the generalist versus the expert kind of perspective. In the beginning of your career, if for some reason you magically know that in the next 30 years, this is just going to be the thing that you want to do, right? For some reason, maybe you're born that way, maybe your parents gave you a lot of opportunities when you were in high school, for some reason, you just magically figure that out. Of course, then you can start to be a little bit like an expert, and then you're trying to narrow your field of focus to fit for that industry. That's possible, and I actually encourage you guys to do that. But I feel like that's not the case for many people, and especially for my situation, that was definitely not the case. When I was in undergrad, 4 years of undergrad, I thought of going to Wall Street. I thought of landing a job in a bank. I thought of going to be a banker and making lots of money. That should never be the focus, at least for myself. I felt like that's a mistake. Because A, how do you know the next 30 years you're going to be a banker, right? You might have a feeling of a role that you might like by reading some magazines or watching some movies. But it's going to be a big leap from a role in a movie than an actual profession that you can launch for the next 20, 30 years. So we need to be a little bit realistic about that. The things that you like in undergraduate school may or may not be the thing that launch your career for the next 30 years. So that's number one. Number two, I felt like in the beginning of my career, there are lots of these small trivial skills that I need to acquire. At least I felt like I didn't have. I said, hey, maybe next 20, 30 years, I might change my career. And if that's going to be the case, then I better learn a little bit of everything else, right? You want to spread your eggs among all the baskets, and you want to have a little bit of expertise in multiple fields. That should really be how you get things started. So with that being said, it's September, it's fall semester. I hope all of you guys enjoy the beginning of semester, straddle in, and I wish you guys best of luck.